Today in the EU ventures to regulate e-commerce breakneck growth.
It is, I would say, the most ambitious and comprehensive reform that we are proposing since the start of the customs union, which was in 1968.
The European Commission today is expecting answers from the Chinese giant TEMU over allegations of selling toxic products and manipulating its users. And on the same day, the Parliament debates on how to better protect consumer rights in the digital space. These discussions could lead to a reform of the current customs code, but implementation could take more than a decade. Is EU bureaucracy too slow to crack down on e-commerce malpractice? Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU. Today, I'm joined in the studio by our tech editor, Elita Grizzi. Hi, Elita.
Hi.
First things first. Have you ever shopped on TEMU?
Well, you're really putting me on the spot there. Yes, I have. I actually received my first order earlier this week. It was for research purposes only. To me, it's a very interesting experience, and it's a little bit almost nostalgic because it reminds me a lot of the time that I lived in China and I used to do a lot of online shopping. And TEMU is a little bit of a lighter version of that. It actually doesn't have all of the features that Taobao or Pinduoduo, which is the Chinese equivalent of TEMU, have. But it very much has the same feel. It has very similar products and user design. And I mean, some of them, I can tell that they're from the same suppliers almost.
Mm-hmm. For those who don't know the website, TEMU is a large online marketplace. There is an absence of a middleman, so producers directly sell their products on the platform. And despite what some could argue are ethical concerns, TEMU's aggressive strategy is not really that different from Amazon or other platforms. So why is the Commission concerned about TEMU?
I think actually TEMU is different to Amazon in a lot of ways. I mean, they may look the same and they're both e-commerce platforms, but they are quite different. And TEMU in particular is very different from most e-commerce companies. If you think about it, its parent company, Pinduoduo, is one of the fastest growing tech companies ever. Amazon and Alibaba, who are the big giants in the space, they were founded in the 1990s, so early internet, Bill Gates kind of days. But Pinduoduo is not even 10 years old. And somehow they've succeeded in becoming this huge international powerhouse. Their founder and CEO, Colin Huang, became the richest man in China for a few days over the summer. And they took on Alibaba, which is the incumbent in the Chinese e-commerce market, with a very smart strategy. So say we all want to buy new toothbrushes. So instead of me buying one, I make a group chat with my friends and I say, oh, do you guys want to buy these toothbrushes? And then we all join together and then we can sort of bid on these bulk orders and buy goods. And the other thing they did, which was very smart, and Taobao was already doing to a certain extent, was gamifying shopping. This isn't really a thing on TEMU, and I wasn't really using Pinduoduo when I was in China, but at least on Taobao, it was pretty crazy. I mean, you can play sort of like a mini game. I used to play this farming game, and then you play this game, and the more you play it, so the more you go on the platform, you get these coupons, and then you can buy direct products from these sellers in like the middle of nowhere in China. So from the beginning, we have a platform that takes market share by being sort of like cheaper than cheap and encouraging bulk buying and also having this gamified, addictive attitude. And what is also, I think, very important to know, and what I'm hearing a lot in conversations with people around Brussels, is that, you know, we can say Amazon and Alibaba are like big, bad tech wolves.
Right.
But they've been around for a really long time and they have a more established regulatory dialogue with the Commission compared to TEMU, Pinduoduo, and also Shein, which also has faced a lot of controversy recently. So we start with this soil, and then you get this platform that is just like incredibly successful in Europe. I mean, I don't know about you, but on Instagram, this probably says more about me than
No, I definitely do get ads for TEMU as well. I have to come
It's crazy.
clean.
And you can't even necessarily tell it's TEMU, right? Like you just see this thing and it could be anything and you click on it, oh, it's TEMU.
Let's talk more about the history of tensions between, well, the very young history of tensions between TEMU and the Commission. It all starts in May. It's then that the Commission labels TEMU as a VLOP, and it's mainly due to consumers' associations coming forward with joint complaints. So first of all, what does the acronym mean, VLOP?
A VLOP is a very large online platform. The definition is around 45 million users in the EU. There can be a little bit of leeway there, like it's not so cut and dry, but that's broadly speaking the definition. Other VLOPs include all the big ones that you may think, like Facebook is one of them. All the big ones. And if you're a VLOP, it means you're so big and so important that you need to do more. Like you can't just do what a mom and pop shop does with their online shop to protect consumers. Like you need to do more. And this revolves around transparency requirements. So you need to make sure that like you report, you need to enhance consumer protection measures that they call them. So you have to do these like risk assessments and evaluate like what could go wrong on your platform. And then you also have to make sure you mitigate these risks, and you have to keep in contact with regulators and tell them like this is what we're doing, and there's like very set processes about how to do that.
So being a VLOP is a turning point in a way because it means you're on the radar way more.
Yeah, and there's like expectations. You need to file these reports periodically. You need to do more, and like the Commission will make sure you do more. And so this happened in May for TEMU. And also in May, there were some complaints filed by BEUC, which is the Pan-European Consumer Association, against TEMU. And there were three things that they were looking at. So the first one was traceability of traders who sell on the platform, which therefore is tied very much to the safety of products sold on the platforms. The second one was what they call manipulative practices or dark patterns. And then transparency around recommendation systems. In June, there was the first request of information on TEMU and Shein. So when the Commission has designated you as a VLOP, they can say, hey, like we've been discussing your mitigation measures and risk assessment measures, and we need to know more about this particular aspect of what you're doing.
Today, indeed, the Commission is stepping up its efforts and its enforcement action against TEMU, asking the platform to provide more information on the mitigation measures it has adopted to fight against risks relating to the presence and reappearance of traders on its online marketplace selling illegal products, but also regarding risks relating to the protection of consumers, the well-being of users, and its recommender systems. Now, TEMU has until the 21st of October of this year to get back to us and to send us replies. The Commission will then, as always, carefully assess these replies and decide on potential next steps.
The platform has some time to respond. TEMU has by today to respond to a second request for information. And then if they don't reply, they may face penalties. Definitely doesn't look good to anyone.
But if they do reply, as we're expecting them to, they've already highlighted how willing they were to collaborate with European institutions. What would happen then if the European Union is unhappy with TEMU's responses?
Well, then they may launch an investigation, and an investigation could go one of many ways. It could, as has happened with some other companies, it could end with a sort of agreement, like the platform makes commitments and they say like, okay, we're going to do better on this and that. And then the Commission can say, based on you saying that you're committing yourself to this stuff, we say, okay, fine, like we're going to monitor you, but we're kind of dropping any further action. If that is not reached, or if they find like some serious breaches, perhaps like they can start what's called infringement procedures, which is the beginning of a penalty, a fine. But at this point, these things take quite a long time. So at this point, it's too early to say, and we're not going to get to see TEMU's response.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I would love to.
At the same time, the Parliament is discussing a reform of custom code that could potentially overlap with what the Commission is doing at the moment. What would the changes entail, and how would they protect better customers?
Basically, the idea is that there are so many goods coming in through these e-commerce websites, and it's a little bit, first of all, it's a lot to handle. So a lot of this reforms has to do with digitizing customs authorities and having this EU customs hub to make sure that they have really good information, like transparency. I think there's also some responsibilities for e-commerce platforms for declaring the goods that are being imported, that are sold on their platforms. There's also a concept of deemed importer. So I think basically that means that like the sort of last company or the company that brings it in is indeed the importer. So even if you say, oh, hey, I'm just a distribution company, that doesn't sort of wipe your hands clean from any liability.
Today's reform will make online platforms key actors in ensuring that goods sold online into the EU comply with all customs obligations, rather than putting the burden on the final consumer as is currently the case. They will need to provide evidence of this through the EU Customs Data Hub. And in more good news for the EU consumers, platforms will also have to charge customs duties and VAT at the time of purchase and remit them to national authorities. That means consumers will no longer be hit with hidden charges or unexpected paperwork when the parcel arrives.
And another aspect to this is not just the safety of goods, but it's also this idea that there's a lot of tax evasion and that a lot of parcels are just not declared to their real value. So then you're just, paying less tax because you have a diamond necklace, but you say it's made of plastic. And you should pay a lot more tax on the diamonds.
Now, this reform is so far from, being finished. There's still negotiations, there will be writing involved, and eventually it might be effective only by 2038. And by then, TEMU might not even exist anymore, or it might look and work very differently than it does now. Would you say that EU bureaucracy is too slow to crack down on e-commerce malpractice?
EU bureaucracy is too slow for any technology. Sorry to say. But of course, it's a trade-off, right? Because there is sort of compromise that must be made. We don't just get to make rules ourselves, and we live in a multi-nation place, right? So these things take a long time. I do think what's really interesting in the case of e-commerce is that there is a lot of drive in this space, both in the council and in the parliament, because this is very clearly a problem. And there's also perhaps almost a little bit of a geopolitical element as well, right? Because they feel that this is just another way that goods are coming from China, in this case, directly, without having to go through an EU company first, right? And coming to people's houses directly, which hurts manufacturing in the EU. And there's truly a lot of drive. There was a statement from a few member states, including Germany, Austria, Denmark, France, and the Netherlands, which are very big ones, calling to speed up these reforms. There's also going to be a discussion in the parliament today about e-commerce. It's an area where everybody kind of agrees that something needs to happen. The fact that these platforms are Chinese and the discussion around China right now is quite
heated.
I was going to say aggressive, but I do think that things may speed up there quite quickly. And the other very interesting aspect where we're seeing a lot of hot boiling blood in Brussels right now is all these questions around manipulative design.
Now, what is manipulative design? You mentioned it before. You mentioned that dark patterns, but I'm not necessarily familiar with what that means.
You probably have already seen it. I mean, there's sort of gradations of it. Manipulative design can literally mean that you're tricked to do something. You click a button that you think does A, but actually next thing you know, there's a diamond necklace at your door. But obviously a lot of these platforms have manipulative design and addictive design baked into them, right? That's almost the business model. And to me, it's very interesting to see where this conversation goes, because I definitely feel manipulated by my Instagram on a daily basis. I mean, I still use it. And maybe that's not such bad manipulation, right? As opposed to literally being cheated and clicking on buttons that do something else. But it still is, right? And where is that line going to be drawn is going to be very interesting to watch, because there has been, all this conversation around minor protection, which is something that every political side agrees on. But I think they'll have very different ideas around how to do it. And going back to China, the Chinese government has actually done a lot around minor protection, maybe too much, in that they try to limit the amount of times people spend on social media and so on. They also had a big fight with illegal and counterfeit goods in their own online platforms, Pinduoduo and Alibaba's Taobao. So globally, everybody kind of wants to do something about it.
Thank you, Eliza. I'm Jada Santana, and this was Euractivist Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractivist to stay on top of the latest news, sign up for our podcast newsletter, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Leave us a star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite streaming platform. It will really help us spread the word about our work. This podcast was produced by Miriam Sánchez Tejada, Charles Cohen, and I. See you tomorrow. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.